Declarative routing for EXISTDB. I'm happy to announce that we have a live speaker here today, the only one on stage presenting his stuff. Juri is a software gardener from Berlin with over 15 years of experience in web development. In most recent years, he has joined the EXISTDB project as a core developer, focusing on the xQuery runtime. Next to consulting for Exist solutions and Yinter, he also maintains and develops Node.exist and Gulp.exist and created xQuery libraries like Expo, Exist, JWT, and Dicey. Take it away.
Correct. Hello. Thanks for having me. Please bear with me. This is my first hybrid event I talk at. But I want to today talk about routing in general, and then we'll delve down to the more special topics. So what is routing? Routing is taking an HTTP request and matching it to an operation. Well, not actually an operation, but you could also say a function. This is what I prefer. So mapping anything to a function. And I would like to go to routing in EXISTDB especially. There we have currently two solutions to do that. The first one is controller.xq, which is maybe familiar to some of you. Actually, you don't need to write XQL anymore. Since 5.3.0, you can also use controller.xq. And what does it do? What are the positive sides of it? Well, it's somewhat declarative. I mean, you will return and dispatch an event that is either forwarding or redirecting your request to something else. It is a single point of entry for your application, which is nice because then you know where it all will go through, and you can then use that. But it's solution agnostic, which could be okay. But yeah, anything you have to do yourself. And it's also very efficient in handling static files, which is a very nice feature. But controller.xq has some downsides. It's EXISTDB specific. So if you know how to use controller.xq, you cannot use that knowledge anywhere else. It's hard to maintain complex controllers. They can really get out of hand because they're essentially just a big if-else, right? Handling of data is somewhat weird. So you can only pass string messages to your handlers, and you can return data directly, but then it's only limited to XML. So that's a weird concept. Authentication and authorization are left to the user to implement, and there's some information available, but not much on how to do that correct. And it's also hard to document. So if you have then your controller, your application, what are my endpoints? How do I communicate that information to users of my application? And it's also easy to do wrong. So there's the current examples that you find almost always do something like allow anything to be passed at the very last expression, or root is do anything, allow anything. And also, if you have a matching route, then it will not match against the method. And if you don't explicitly say, okay, I want to allow only GET requests here at this point, then you will also allow PUT and POST requests at this endpoint. And this is something that not many know, and it's really a problem because, yeah, you might allow your application to be misused, abused. So then there came along RestXQ. That was, I think, in 2012, that was shown at XML Prague by Adam Retter and I think Christian Grün. And it does it very differently. So instead of having an if-else, they have patterns that they match. So if your URL that comes in matches against the pattern, then this route will be called. And also these routes are picked by specificity. So when you have, for instance, a route that only accepts JSON and you want to post XML to it, then it will not allow that, which is a very good feature. That's basically that. And also only defined routes are allowed. So anything that you don't specify, you cannot call, which is very good for security reasons. And it uses function annotations, a very handy tool and familiar from Java routing applications that I can't really remember. Maybe somebody else knows the Java routing that uses annotations. Well, never mind. And this is also implemented in BaseX, as I said. It's a shared standard, so if you have something working in EXISTDB, you can also use that information on BaseX, which is very handy to have. So the login is not that strict. And there's a spec and the good documentation available. You have to search for it. Sometimes I'm going to the BaseX documentation for how to do that, and I hope it works also in EXISTDB, which is not always the case. I think they have somewhat deviated both implementations, but it's still a good starting point. Yeah, but there's also things missing, like tooling. We yesterday heard Norman say, yeah, he likes Node.js because there's so many tools around it, and that's true. And it's something that is really important nowadays. It's not only a library that you have, but the ecosystem around it that actually does the trick. And you have, for each output format, you will have to write a separate handler. And so if you have routes that can produce multiple outputs, you have all of a sudden many functions doing that. Same thing, essentially. I mean, there's still the possibility to do that, but there's a lot of scaffolding you have to do. Handlers are functions here, and they accept parameters, but each parameter that they expect is also a parameter to that function itself, so that if you allow 10 parameters in a search interface, for instance, then you will have a function with 10 parameters, and I really don't like that. There's also a route matching issue. I think it's negligible, but also something that I'd like to see to go away. But yeah, I reported it a while ago. Hasn't happened that much since then. You can document a decent documentation by using an external tool that is available. And it's also, it's called OpenAPI for RestXQ, I think, which then will create an API definition from your defined route handlers, which is nice, but you have to do it yourself. And you also will have to edit it by hand afterwards, likely. And also here, authentication and authorization is left to the implementer as an exercise, which is okay, but also I know from experience that many people will get it wrong. So I was at a point where I thought, okay, I have to implement something, and there's really no way to get there, a good way to get there, and started researching. So what are my possibilities? Can I get around the limitations of controller.xq, and or can I get RestXQ to do what I want? And both attempts fail, and also my own attempts to get around those failed too. I was, yeah, not devastated might be a hard word, but I was, yeah, unhappy with the solution or the current status quo, and again got a request to implement a specification. That in that case it was web annotation protocol, which already came with a specification in form of an open API specification, and I needed to implement that, and I thought, okay, both ways will not work for me. I need to find something else, and came up with a proof of concept where it essentially works. So back then I created XQuery data structures out of the specification and then read that. And yeah, it was okay-ish, and it showed that there can be a better solution, but it was not there yet until I spoke with Wolfgang Meyer from eXist Solutions and or EXISTDB or TI Publisher. And he also was searching for a better solution for routing for TI Publisher in specifically, and said, okay, yeah, let me see what you have there. And so, yeah, this is a good starting point, and took it from there and came up with a very nice solution to start with the open API specification. And so what he essentially did is you provide the routing with a specification, and that does the routing for you from there. So the handling of which route goes where is declared in open API specification. What is open API specification? It allows to describe an API that is accessible through HTTP or HTTP-like protocols. It's declarative. That's why I'm here and showing it to you today. And it's documentation first. So first thing you do is define your API before you program anything. And there you think, what do I need? Which parameters should a route have? And let's see what it looks like. It starts by declaring its own version, which is very important because the specification is alive, it's evolving. So we need to know which version you are referring to. It declares its own version as well. So you can have versioned APIs, which is also very important and also often overlooked. Okay. And yeah, after that, here in the lower part, you see that there's then the path itself described. I will come back to that later. It's also vendor neutral. So when you have the specification, when you came up with that actual goal to see, okay, this is what I want my people to use, my users to use, then you can take that information and use it with whatever product you want. So you can, from there, you can use Python, you can use a different database, whatever. It does not have to be used with what I will be presenting later. And there's also a ton of existing tooling around. Like you have testing libraries that validate against your specification. You have scaffolding tools for different languages, and much more than I could show you here today. And that was the birth of Roaster. There's a lot more to it. So after the first initial thing for TI Publisher, I thought, yeah, that's nice, that's very good. But this is now TI Publisher specific, and we would like to have that as a general tool because it adds so much more value to routing. So we built Roaster. This is a library to build on. It provides a solid ground for you to make your application. And it all starts with a request. Something comes in and wants to go somewhere. The route. So a very familiar kind of describing. In RestXQ, also, you say you want to have a static path, maybe, things, and then you want to have a dynamic part in it, the ID. And this ID part will then become a parameter for your route handler. Let us see such a route, a very easy route at the beginning, how it's specified. /play, so whenever you say, my application lives somewhere in EXISTDB, but this is not EXISTDB specific, so it could be anywhere. At this endpoint, if /play is called, then use, and it's called with a get operation, so it's now limited to get also. Please do this. Call the function app ping pong. It expects only one parameter, ping. And this parameter is in the query, so it's after the question mark. And it's of type Boolean. There must be, so each, as you saw in the previous example, each parameter must be described. Otherwise, you won't get it. The handler will not receive anything that is there. So you have also built-in filtering of malicious data also. So this will eliminate a whole class of attacks, I would say. You have to specify where this parameter is. Is it in the path as the ID before? Or is it in the query as our ping from the ping pong example? Or is it in a cookie? Or is it in the body? Or is it in the header? So each of those can be specified and also will then up in the parameters object that is passed to the handler. We come to that later. What is the type of this? It's a Boolean, a number, a date. There's even more, and I will come to that later. But also, these parameters will then be cast to that type for you, so you don't have to do that yourself. Let us now look at the body. Now we have a post operation. That's auth login here. And it has a request body. If you specify that, then you say, OK, I will have something in the request body. And this is also required, as you see. So you can also have nullable and other types. So you can really say, if this request does not have this, does not have a body, then reject it immediately. Here, this is now, the next slide is the request body in more detail, the contents of it. So it describes what kind of encoding it uses, or the media type, and also a schema for it, and which properties does it have. So this is an easier way of providing that information, but the latest spec, the 3.1.0, also now has built-in schema, JSON schema. So there's more to come. We want to have, for our login, we want to have a user that is of type string, and we want to have a password. That's not highlighted here, sorry for that. But it's also of type string and has a format. This is interesting for both input and output of that. I'll show you later in the demo section. I think we'll have enough time for that, and also for extended questions and answers. Let's see how a route handler looks like. It is essentially a function from a map, from a single map to an item, to anything. So you declare your function anywhere, but it has to have the same name. So this is the matching part, the name of the function. is the same as the operation ID. And it will receive this one map, this is the request object. And you will then return something. This is the response. So here in our ping pong example is, if I get a ping, I will respond with a pong. Otherwise, I will return a ping. The response. Let's have a look at that. Can you see that? It's a little, I don't know. I only highlighted it before, which is stupid, but it's a very random number that I chose by throwing a dice. And so my random would here return just a 4. And this is all you have to do to return a 4 from this route handler. You can also make a scene and return an error. And that will instantly trigger error handling and will, in this case, return a bad request. So status code 400 is set, and your error handling will be triggered, which I'll show you later. You can then send a message also with it. I can't work like that. And also pass additional data to that, which you can then later use in your error handling, which is very powerful, I think. And it's just xQuery. So there's no special things in here. I'm very sorry. These are last night's edits. So I should have this in all much better visible. Should I change that right now? No, I think I don't. Better not to. Let's not do it live. So if you do want to make a custom response, that's of course also possible. You can set a different header status code, I mean, and then pass any message with it. So in this case, this will be a string because XMLDB store returns a string, but you could have anything in there, maps and whatnot. And this is then all serialized to the type that you want to return, that is defined to be returned, and matches the accepted types. A redirect is done by sending a 301 that tells the client, okay, this is a redirect. You can specify any message with it, but you don't have to. Important is that you have to say, okay, you have to set a return type because you're now using the 4 parameter version of roster response, and you will have to set a header. This is the 4th parameter, and here we say, okay, go to that same location, but add the ping parameter to it. Query parameter to it. So here you have it highlighted. I hope it's a little better. And next to it, you see the four parts of the response object: code, type, body, and headers. And these are also queue names, which are part of the map that is handled internally. That is not so important right now. You don't have to memorize that, but it will be interesting when you develop with it later on. So for ease of use, the router module exposes them as variables so that you don't have to write EXISTDB name all the time, and your tooling can autocomplete those. Let's talk about media types. So it's a negotiation between client and server. He wants something or he sends something. And in this case, do we allow this route to consume such a body? You can specify that. by saying, and you have to specify that by saying, in the content of the request body, I accept text plain. If you don't do that, the request will be rejected. And you can specify schemas here as well. And now we want to respond to that. And we want to determine the serialization method from the returned content type or media type. There's XML and JSON, obviously. And okay, of course, application XML will be serialized as XML. Text XML as well. JSON, of course, is application JSON. But there's more. HTML5, of course, text HTML. And if you send something with application XML, XHTML, then it will be serialized as XHTML. Text is anything binary. Image JPEG, application JavaScript is text. Application octet stream is text, of course. But there's even more XML. Can you think of something else? Well, application TI plus XML exists. And you want this to also automatically be returned or serialized as XML. And we do that. So actually anything application asterisk XML will be returned or serialized as XML because there's currently over 800 such media types registered with the IANA. Yeah. And image SVG XML, of course, we want to have that. JSON, there's application LD JSON schema. It's very, very important to support that. But there's even more, 233 media types that end with plus JSON, and they will all be, just by specifying the media type in the response, will be serialized as JSON. So you can pass maps and arrays, and it will all work out of the box. Anything else is just text. So anything that I haven't yet added here is text. And this weird little face there is also important because you can specify a request body that accepts anything. Just by saying this, you will allow anybody. And it's just string and binary. We cannot say anything about it, and because it could be anything, right? Yeah. Error handling is also important, and I already showed you the drama route handler, and so almost all errors, even syntax errors in your route handlers, will be catched and returned by the effective error handler. What is the effective error handler, you say? Well, we have one central error handling in place, so anywhere in your code, even syntax errors, as I said, will be catched by this error handler and returned. So if you make a mistake while developing, you will get a nicely formatted message, not the XML thing anymore. If you don't want to send XML, if you want to send JSON, then you'll get JSON back. And so there's, even in the development process, you have not a discussion, but well, a back and forth, so you can communicate or with your application even when it's in an error state. And we allow custom error handlers. For each route, you can specify my HTML error. How would that look like? My HTML error, the name must match, otherwise it won't mark. It gets an error as a map, not a request. And you can then, format something that is useful for a user, that speaks to him, that is, tells him, oh yeah, I'm sorry that this happened. But this is the information that we have. Maybe it's useful for you. Questions so far? No? So let's talk about authentication. I told you before that it's a bad idea to leave that to anybody. Let's do that specify what kinds of authentications do we accept at all, anywhere. We accept basic auth, for instance. That is, it has a type, it has a scheme. Actually, you just have to copy those because it's the one thing in the specification that says basic auth has to be defined like that. So there's not much to say about. Cookie authentication is also supported. And here, especially interesting is that it's in a cookie. It's of type API key. I don't know, likely there's more to that. But here for us, interesting is the name. So for anybody using EXISTDB, there's this concept of login domains where you say, I'm logging into that specific application. And it's a nice way to expose that to the specification saying, okay, this is the login domain that belongs to my application, so that this roasted.com login here will be checked on authentication and also when starting the session. So you can always be sure these two will match. There's no weird things happening in between. And then per each route or for the whole application, you can say, okay, these are the authentication methods that I say. These can be overridden as well. So if I have a route that is only available for basic authentication or one that is only available for cookie authentication, then you can just leave it out, or even say no authentication method is allowed here, and then leave it empty. Yeah.
Custom authentication.
We come to that. Yeah. Authorization is a different thing. Is actually, now that I know who the user is he allowed to do what he wants to do? Right? And this is an interesting parking sign that I found online. It says it's only allowed for people that are, I don't know, part of physics or something. I don't know. So yeah, I can say this is an addition, EXISTDB specific edition or roaster specific edition. Anything with X in front of is specific. That's important to note. But this effectively constrains the that this route or the whole application is only for members of the group physics. And you can also say, okay, physics is maybe not enough. Maybe I add database and administrators as well. They can also park there. Or specified for a specific user, only admin is allowed to use this route. So let's get into more deeper waters now. Let's build something with it, not on it. Let's have a custom route. Well, okay, not I'm jumping ahead. First, I wanted to provide because I was tasked often to later see what has happened, why did this take so long, and where are my requests going in and out. I often look at log files, and so I decided it's a good thing to have extensive logging by default. And so you see here is an excerpt that is shortened from incoming and outgoing requests. So the request and the response are always logged. You don't have to do anything for it. And you can then later on use it to see how long took a request, for instance. If you compare those two, you see there's 18 milliseconds of response time, which is okay, I think. But this was on localhost. So. But it's a real request. I mean, this is a real login that I did. So how do I map those? If I mean, time is a construct, right? How do I see if something has happened in between in a multi-user environment? How do I, see which request belongs to which response? And so here is a shortened UUID the request ID that is given automatically. You don't have to do anything. It's just there. And afterwards, if you have to do aftermath of something, you can see, oh yeah, okay, these two belong together. And then I can see how long it took the server to respond there. And it also tells you the status code that it provided. So here you have an example where the logout request redirects to itself and then sends it to 100. And what you also notice is that the request IDs are two separate things because there are two separate requests. So this is harder to follow. I am thinking about ways to even make this be mappable to one interaction, but I haven't found a solution yet. I think there's so many smart people here and in the audience that maybe somebody points me to something. I would be really glad. What happens if we have an error? So oftentimes I have seen some EXISTDB applications that then swallow errors and they're never logged anywhere. And I really wanted to make it obvious that anything that happens is logged. And not only that, but also have a structured information of what actually really happened here. So we see here, this is a syntax error that was catched. This is then visible in the log. And also you see that the return code changed to 500 in this case. So it's not a bad request, but it's really a server problem that happened. Yeah. The module part here is also a work in progress, I want to point out. So it shouldn't be string here. This is because we do a function lookup when doing the handler matching. And there seems to be some issue that it does lose its connection to the module itself. I will look into that. But you also see a line number and a column number, and together with I cut out some information there, but together with the route, you will likely find that actual problem there. Let's talk about middlewares. Middlewares is a powerful concept in many routing implementations that I have seen and have used and liked. So there's Express in Node.js world. There's in Jetty uses that's query filters, and so it's ubiquitous, and I like the concept. So I took a run with it and added it to Roaster. It receives both the request and the response data. So, so I have to speed up. Sorry, okay. It receives both request and response data and is allowed to modify both. This is a very powerful thing because in authentication, for instance, we add the user information to the request object so that any handler that is passed to can then inspect that and see, okay, yeah, I want to do this and that with it, like different things with it. As I said, it's a widely adopted concept, and it's a function from two maps passed in, and it also returns more than one map too in this case, but this cannot be explained in this fashion. I see here, you see here a example middleware that is called beep boop, and it gets request and response, as I said, and it modifies the requests. So it adds the beep property to the request object and sets it's a boop, and also modifies the response. And here it sets a header to existing headers, could also remove all the other headers. And this is something where you have to take care, but you also have a powerful tool to do anything with a request and the response. And here you send, here the xbeep header is set. Custom authorization was a question, and is one thing I want to add is that all the internals that we have in place are all middlewares. So you can override those as well. This is where custom authorization comes in. Let's start on the API definition side. So I add a new authentication method here and say it's an API key, it's in the header, and the name of the header is XAuth token, and JWT authentication is maybe somewhat familiar, but it's in a nutshell, it's a bearer token authentication that you have in many cases like GitHub APIs. So yeah, you could add this now to EXISTDB, to your EXISTDB application. So as in the previous example, I just add this after I have defined it to the security things that a route accepts. And you have to write it. That's true. I can show you the example. It's already in the examples. The JWT authentication, I don't have it here. I just want to wrap up with what is left to do. So there's a lot left to do. For instance, on the OpenAPI specification, there's left to implement the references, which is already on our list. And we want to have schema validation. This is not done yet. So we only have a very basic form of validation in form of the type and the content type, media type. Tooling, there's generator exist, a very nice handy tool to create new EXISTDB applications, and we want to have an app generation specifically for roasted applications. App scaffolding, we want to have compiling API definitions to XQuery for performance reasons. And on the server side, we want to have static file handling, roaster as a servlet, because essentially I want to get rid of some things that are there for a long time in EXISTDB. That is, controller.xq is still needed at this point, but we want to get rid of it. And more documentation, of course. Currently, it's only in, this is where you should start if you want to do something, is go to the roaster GitHub and look at the README and look at the example application and look at the tests to see examples how to use it. That was me. Thank you. I made it in time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juri. We are going to switch a few cables. So before I can ask the Zoom audience if they want to say anything, we must make sure that we have sound from and video. Is there anybody in the room who would like to comment or ask a question? Maybe you, Eric? Yeah, was your question answered properly? Because I thought you asked him about authentication, and it was about authorization.
I was wondering if you could add, for instance, a specific function that does authentication.
Yes, yes, that is. I mean, you specify it first, but then you have to implement it as well. And there's already a working example in the roaster test application that I would have loved to show, but I ran out of time.
I was wondering
later,
personally, that you started by saying controller.xq is EXIST specific as a drawback, but you ended creating something that's EXIST specific.
Only partially, very partially. So there's a few additions that we made, which makes life very, very much easier, but the gold does not lie in that, because you could also add those constraints to your other X constraints, and X error handler are the two additions that we made. And I don't think that is a big problem to overcome, even if you move that to somewhere else. I think the route definitions is actually the gold. I mean, this is why this is a specification in a nutshell. And what I didn't show is that it's also anything that you have has a description. So the one thing I would like to show you also, what I haven't had the time for is that you will get a test bed out of the box. Without doing anything, you can then have nice boxes where you can test your API. And this is, I think, actually a very valuable addition, but you get it with any OpenAPI specification. So this is something that OpenAPI does for you. That's the tooling that I mentioned at the beginning.